If you're taking the LSAT in September or beyond, you're going to want to change up your prep. Reports from August LSAT takers indicated that LSAC is, in fact, increasing the proportion of formal logic, conditional reasoning, and quantitative reasoning questions in the logical reasoning section. This is not just on the experimental section anymore, it's on the actual scored portions of the LSAT. I'll walk you through more about these reports and what they mean for your LSAT prep going forward. For those who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005, and I personally increased my own LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. Now, of course, logic games is no longer on the test. LSAC removed the logic games section and replaced it with a second scored logical reasoning section, starting with this past August's LSAT. Now, around the time they announced this change, LSAC promised they were not going to make any radical changes to the LSAT, meaning they were not going to add some new bizarre LSAT question type. The question types on the LSAT are the same ones they've always been, the 15 or so types of logical reasoning questions, which include inference questions, flaw questions, sufficient assumption questions, and parallel questions. These questions have always appeared on the LSAT's logical reasoning section. So LSAC is technically telling the truth when they say they're not adding anything new. But what they are doing is they are increasing the proportion of questions of these types that involve formal logic, that involve conditional reasoning, where diagramming might be useful. More questions involving testing the distinction between numbers and percentages, absolute values versus relative values. Now, the entire reason LSAC removed the logic game section from the LSAT was due to a lawsuit from blind test takers who contended that they were at unfair disadvantage on the LSAT's logic game section because they couldn't benefit from diagramming the way other test takers could, which is a pretty fair point if you ask me. LSAC settled the lawsuit ultimately and agreed to develop a new version of the test without the then current logic games section. Ultimately, LSAC decided simply to remove the logic games section and add a second scored logical reasoning section. And so while LSAC has technically adhered to the terms of their joint settlement agreement with the plaintiff's attorneys, it seems they might not be adhering to the spirit of the agreement because they're now including more questions on the LSAT where diagramming could in fact be useful. Now, when I talk about formal logic and conditional reasoning, what exactly do I mean here? I mean questions where the stimulus contains concrete terms, oftentimes conditional statements, where diagramming might be useful, where you have, for example, if X then Y, meaning X requires Y or X arrow Y. Now, there are countless examples of these questions on previous LSAT logical reasoning sections, and so LSAC is not really including any new question types here, but they are seemingly including more of these questions on the LSAT than they have in the past. This is what the reports from August test takers say, that there were a ton of these questions on the logical reasoning experimental sections, and there are more of them on the scored portions of the LSAT in August than there were on previous LSAT administrations. And so this could mean there is a slow buildup or a gradual increase in the proportion of these question types on the LSAT where diagramming could be useful, where an understanding of conditional reasoning is incredibly important. Now, I'll share with you some concrete examples of the types of questions I'm talking about here so that you can practice them if you're taking the September 2024 LSAT or beyond. So for example, and I'm using the old LSAT prep test numbering system here just because I'm personally more familiar with it. And I know that many of you are still using the old numbering system from 1 to 94. If you're using the new numbering system from 101 to 158, you may just want to Google the question topic to find the question I'm referring to here. So from prep test 30, we have an inference question involving inspired musical performances where there are several conditional statements and diagramming is likely useful. Taking contrapositives may be useful as well. From prep test 44, we have a flaw question in testing your understanding of numbers versus percentages with Clara Schumann, who plays the piano. We have prep test 53, where there was a parallel reasoning question involving April rainfall, lots of conditional statements in this one as well. And then from prep test 58, we have a sufficient assumption question involving handmade wigs, where again, diagramming could be useful. So what you see here is from these previous examples going all the way back to prep test 30, which is roughly 25 years ago or so. These questions have been on the LSAT for decades now, but we may be seeing a lot more of them going forward, and we've already started to see an example of that gradual buildup starting with this past August LSAT. LSAC has been testing out more and more of these questions on the experimental sections going back to at least November 2023, almost 1 year ago. And this past August LSAT saw a ton of these questions on the unscored extra sections, which means we may see a whole lot more of them in the near future, including in September and beyond. Now, if you're not clear on these concepts, if you'd like my help in getting ready for the LSAT whenever you're taking it, there are a wide variety of ways I could support you at LSAT Unplugged. We offer live online classes via Zoom, on-demand video courses, small group coaching, and one-on-one coaching. You can check out the links below to find out more and to book a call with me and my team. We'd be glad to help you out. And while there are roughly 15 different types of logical reasoning questions, some show up more frequently than others. We may be seeing a whole lot more of those types I mentioned earlier, but the three most common types you're definitely going to want to be clear on are inference questions, flaw questions, and necessary assumption questions. Now, necessary assumption questions are informal logic, meaning that you're not going to want to diagram those, but in some cases, inference questions and flaw questions, diagramming may be useful. Make sure that you're crystal clear on taking your contrapositives, the difference between sufficient conditions and necessary conditions, and the proper indicator words for each one. Anyway, folks, that's all for now. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.